Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Grade 11 juniors. Of course, you are going to carry on concerning the ramifications that happened because of World War I and the repercussions that changed the course of the war, and about the impact of war itself. And as I said in the previous lecture, that can we say that the Treaty of Versailles was able to stop war? Was it able to build strong pillars of peace that would stop possible war, like what President Wilson said, that if countries and global empires would not settle down and stop competition, a possible war can happen. Maybe his prediction was come to be true after 2 decades, as I said in the previous lecture. So let's delve more inside the repercussions of World War I, the kind of destruction that it caused, and the Treaty of Versailles, the negativity about it, and whether or not it was able to sustain peace, was it able to protect people, or was it going to be a fragile and a weak treaty that indirectly it's going to increase the feelings of hatred, feelings of enmity, feelings of aggression and vengeance for a whole generation, precisely the German generation. Let's talk more about this after we're going to talk about the war destroyed thousands and thousands of roads, bridges, and farmlands. Of course, all these discussions happen in Europe. Precisely, we talk about the number of deaths, number of those who are wounded, big number of those who were killed. Now, when you talk about a total of like 10 million, of course, this number will be duplicated in World War II, but percentages and the scenes of devastation were so many. War, death, and destruction. Of course, everything changed in Europe. Even literature changed. There was a new kind of theater called the absurd. Like, for example, Samuel Beckett, who started the absurd kind of theater. Everything, all colors, even in the drawings. No one started using colored or bright paintings. Everything was dim because of the frustration. It was a global age of depression. Also, the feelings of existentialism and feelings of separation from all kind of religious, social, cultural norms spread all over people, because they found out that because of the extreme kind of massacres and big number of death, people lost hope. And that's why the absurd theater reflected this kind of depression, where people lost in time, people were buried. Mass burying procedures were done. There's no winner in war. If you're going to look at the toll of number of deaths, about 9.5 something casualties in World War I, and it's drastically, it hit Europe, and it affected Europe basically for and crushed any kind of spirit of, like, victorious spirits. Paris Peace Conference, signed a Treaty of Versailles. Victorious nations signed treaties, defeated ones, as we said before. Clemenceau, Wilson, and David Lloyd George, Prime Minister, French Prime Minister, American President. Those are the ones who made and shared in making decision. One of the reasons I said before why this treaty was considered unfair by the Germans, because they were just called in the last day just to sign the treaty, but no one consulted them about the terms of the treaty. That's why they felt it's unfair. But the winners, of course, the winners of the war, they are the ones who won the war, and they are the ones who are going to stipulate the basic terms for this battle. Now we have the Wilson 14 points, 1919, open diplomacy, freedom of seas, free trade. All these are self-determination. Of course, this very wicked term, because indirectly it led to the colonization of many countries around the world. To colonize, to conquer. But the form of self-determination was like to bring an advanced country like Britain or France to help countries that cannot rule themselves by themselves, and to help them in launching their governments and systems, all that stuff. Of course, indirectly, this was another form of colonization, like what happened in Sykes-Picot and division of Germany, basic parts, and the foundation of new nations. Of course, it's David Lloyd George. So we have the Germans had to disarm, as I said before, to cut army to 100,000, only to pay large indemnity, which is like kind of reparation. Indemnity to return Alsace-Lorraine to France. Of course, it's part of Germany, and Germans felt that that's why. But they signed in World War II. We're gonna see the first attack will be against France, because there was big hatred and big grudge from the Germans against the French, who were continuously for 2 decades, the whole generation, as I said in the previous lecture, was raising with big contempt and anger and rage against the unfair treaty of Versailles. That's why the reason for the commencement of World War II, as well, I believe, is calling for vengeance for the repercussions, and especially the internal and feelings of grudge and hatred that started the German population, that led to the formation of the Nazi regime. To give some of her land, all except war guilt. Of course, many historians believe that many are guilty because of war, but to blame one nation, this is a big question about it. However, the Germans lost the war, and they can't discuss, they just have to abide. This is the term of the winners of the war. Let's look about the areas that were taken from Germany. Basically, the most hurting ones was the Prussian part. Hitler was living in this area. At that time, there was a big between the Austrian Empire and the Germans. There was like an open border, a strong cultural merging was between these two areas. Of course, Hitler, he became later on a German soldier. He was at that time in World War I Polish soldier, an Austrian soldier, and after the division and the formation of new areas that were taken by force from Germany, Hitler and many other troops were feeling like it was unfair. Parts from the Prussia were taken, the Alsace and Lorraine, parts of Belgium, part of France. This indirectly led to the formation of the Second World War, and precisely parts of Germany were given to Czechoslovakia, of course. Of course, German territorial losses. Alsace-Lorraine, West Prussia, Danzig city, the Saar under the League of Nations. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania became independent. Germany lost all Asian, African colonies. They had basically colonies in all these areas in Africa, of course. Now, Germany had to disarm. Disarmament is very important. They are not allowed to build an army anymore. Of course, many caricatures would discuss the guilt of war and basically the problems about war at that time. Of course, now a cartoon published in British newspaper 1991 figures the right art Prime Minister of France. And here that's like sarcastic about how Lloyd George did however, like the Allies were able to now to start building what was destroyed, and the big rage that happened by the Germans who were calling for it's like the rightful things. And this caricature reflects the state of absurdity and extreme depression, and that it was part of the German newspapers cartoons. They were, how the Allies, you see this coffin, it talks about how the Allies buried Germany in this treaty, and how the Allies sent Germany to the Gallatin, this where his head is going to be chopped This is Wilson, this is Clemenceau, this is Lloyd George. These are the people who set the terms for the killing and for the crippling, for the burying of the Germans. And where, because at that time in World War I, everybody was blaming the other. So the winners suddenly, after winning the war, they blamed Germany. So the Germans were supposed to pay the tribute. Paying the tribute, this was, of course, everybody was blamed, but the winners would set the terms for and make Germany pay for what happened, for kind of caricature, like all these cartoons to blame Germany and considered unfair by the press, especially the German press. So why did the big three disagree over the Treaty of Versailles? Discussed this last time. Clemenceau, he wanted to be taking harsh measures to stop any possible rise of the Germans. David Lloyd George, somehow like the President Wilson, they wanted to not to totally be harsh on the Germans in the terms of the treaty, to give them a chance to fight back against the communist spread in the East, fearing of a possible communist Russian spread, so the Germans can be able to rise again against the Russians. There was a treaty that held between the Russians and the Germans. Brest-Litovsk was about no one will attack, no one will engage in the war. The Germans will not attack the Russians will not attack the Germans. All of this should be like, there was a dead zone, the war, and in this way the Germans were able to make sure that their backyard is safe. Of course, basically, the Allies, precisely in North America, precisely Britain, they felt that the dangers rising from this big polar bear known as the Russians, and that's why they needed to take parts from the great Russian Empire, like Czechoslovakia, Poland, from Latvia, Estonia, Belarus after that, all of these parts, in order to limit the power of the communist-rized this is how you can have more formation of more maps, more divisions, more charts, because we have more new nations are formed, especially in the Russian eastern border, the eastern part of Europe, which is going to be later on in World War II, get the name of the Iron Curtain that were going to be created by Stalin, but this is another story, of course. Of course, new tensions, weak, unstable governments, weak economy, national news stronger. Wilson suggested forming a peacekeeping organization, so I can predict with great certainty that within another generation, of course, actually, it's very schizophrenic, because Wilson, he insisted that this treaty should provide peace at the same time. The allies themselves, the ones who were setting the treaty, they had different opinions, especially precisely between the French, British, and the Americans. Of course, here we have more criticism going to rise later on. The League of Nations was formed in 1920 to prevent war. So did it prevent war? We know that it's not. We look how blame for the Germans, the Keystone, in order to build a bridge, Belgium and France, who are having different opinion. The Belgians and the French, they were against giving Germany a chance to rise again and crushing it totally. England and Italy, like the Americans, they wanted to give a chance for the Germans to rise against possible communist rise. However, the Germans had the Keystone, which is where the bridge was supposed to be like this. We don't talk about this, and this can, I guess, that this kind of American interference and not allowing to stop or hold the German possible future and to crush the German, to go into Germany and to force a new government. They didn't interfere in Germans after the war. They just accepted the term of the war by the Germans. And this led to the commencement that allowed, they gave the chance for the Germans to rise with their economy, and the Germans later on, they only paid 15% of the big reparations that were supposed to pay as a cost of the war, since they were blamed for the war after that. So do you believe that Treaty of Versailles succeeded? Of course, I believe, since we are now in the 21st century, of course, thumbs down, because the United Nations was formed, which is because Treaty of Versailles failed to provide possible peace. Of course, status of women, of course, increased, developed, because women shared in building machines, in working, and covering the absence of the males who were fighting in the battle. They were trying to prove their feminine status. Women worked in munition factories, and they proved that they are able to share in the community. That's why their status, especially after World War I and World War II, drastically changed. We can do it. All of this reflects the ability of women to share in the community and all that stuff. Now I have just like, the last part, the Treaty of Versailles was, of course, Treaty of Versailles was bitterly criticized by the Germans, who complained that it had been dictated to them that violated the spirit. The 14 points, of course, didn't care, because the Germans lost and they have to accept the terms of the treaty, as they said. So that's why numerous concessions were made to Germans before the rise of Adolf Hitler. However, the Germans, by time, especially when arrival of Hitler to lead the Nazi regime in 1936, Germany became more overconfident, and they stopped caring about the allies' idea, especially France and Britain. And they were building their army again, because, as I said before, the Versailles Treaty didn't finalize and try to crush down all possible revival of the German army and all that stuff. Many historians claim that the combination of harsh treaty and subsequent tax enforcement of its provisions paved the way for the absurd German militarism, as I said, 1930s, and the rise of the Bildreich German force and Nazi radical superior mentality raised by Adolf Hitler. The huge German reparations and war guilt close fostered deep resentment settled in the German that led to the rise of Nazi regime and Hitler, who remilitarized the Rhineland in 1936, violation of the treaty. But of course, here the Allies will start appeasing, because they were afraid from another possible war where no one going to stop him. This indirectly will lead later on to German aggression and commencement of the Second War. This will be the last part of the lesson. The coming weeks, inshallah, we're going to carry on with more assessments and questions about Treaty of Versailles. We'll see. Thank you very much, juniors. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.